The late summer heat of 1887 hung heavy over Boston like a damp wool blanket. Clara Ellison stood on the train platform, clutching her ticket in one hand and her small valise in the other. Rain had begun to fall, soft and misty at first, then heavier, drumming against the station's metal roof. Fellow travelers scurried past her, hurrying to board, but Clara remained still, her blue silk traveling dress, the finest she owned, already darkening with moisture around the hem. I have to leave. Boston holds nothing for me anymore. The thought echoed in her mind as she stared back at the city skyline, the familiar church spires and brick buildings fading in the rain. Behind her, the train whistled impatiently. "Final boarding for the Western Line! Final boarding!" the conductor called. Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward, leaving behind the only home she'd ever known. The dress she wore had cost her 3 months' teacher's salary, an extravagance that still made her stomach tighten with guilt. But first impressions mattered, especially when meeting the man who would become her husband. Just 1 week earlier, she had been summoned to Headmistress Blackwood's office at the Boston Ladies' Academy, where she had taught for 5 years. "Miss Ellison, I regret to inform you that the academy must close its doors at the end of this term," the headmistress had said, her usually stern face softened with genuine regret. "Our benefactor has withdrawn his support. I've written letters of recommendation for all faculty, but with schools cutting back everywhere." The unfinished sentence hung in the air between them. They both knew what it meant. Without a teaching position, without family, without savings, Clara faced a bleak future. That evening, scanning the newspaper advertisements for any position suitable for an unmarried woman of 26, her eyes had caught on a peculiar notice. "Wife wanted. Rancher in Pine Ridge, New Mexico Territory seeks educated, respectable lady of good character for matrimony. Must be willing to relocate. Correspondence invited. H. Jameson." Clara had never considered herself the type of woman who would answer such an advertisement. She had once dreamed of a love match, like her parents had shared. But those dreams had died 3 years ago, when her fiancé, Robert, had broken their engagement to marry a banker's daughter with a substantial dowry. "I'm sorry, Clara," he had said, not meeting her eyes. "A man in my position must think practically." Now, as the train lurched forward, Clara opened her reticule and withdrew the small leather-bound journal that had belonged to her mother. It was her most precious possession, one of the few things she hadn't sold to finance this journey. She ran her fingers over the worn cover, then carefully opened it to a passage she had read countless times. "Thomas says we must be practical, that love is not enough to sustain a family. But I cannot believe that. I have chosen love over my father's fortune, and though we struggle, I have never regretted it. Some nights when the children sleep and Thomas plays his violin by candlelight, I know I have more wealth than my father's entire bank could hold." Clara closed the book, her throat tight. Her mother had chosen love and never looked back, even when it meant being cut off from her wealthy family. But that love had been real, not an arrangement with a stranger from a newspaper advertisement. "I'm being practical, Mother," Clara whispered to the window, watching Boston disappear behind her. "Like you never were." The journey west stretched into 3 long days of rocking train cars, changing at stations that grew progressively smaller and dustier. Each mile took Clara further from everything familiar, toward a future she could barely imagine. During quiet moments, she read and reread the 3 letters she had exchanged with Harold Jameson, whose neat, precise handwriting described a 42-year-old widower with a prosperous cattle ranch who valued education and sought a partner who could be a companion as well as a wife. His letters were respectful, even kind, but devoid of romantic sentiment, which suited Clara fine. She wasn't looking for romance. She was looking for security, stability, a place to belong. On the 3rd day, exhaustion overtook her. The rhythmic clacking of the train wheels, the stifling heat, the poor sleep of previous nights all conspired to make her eyelids heavy. She tried to stay alert as the conductor called out station names, but her head kept nodding forward. "Pine Ridge in 30 minutes!" The conductor's voice penetrated her foggy consciousness, and Clara jerked awake. She straightened her hat, checked her reflection in a small hand mirror, and rehearsed once more what she would say to Harold Jameson when they finally met. The train slowed, wheels screeching against the rails. Clara gathered her belongings, heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. Her new life was about to begin. Dust Creek Station, the conductor announced. Half asleep, Clara rose and moved toward the exit, following the few passengers disembarking. It was only when her feet touched the wooden platform, when the dry, hot air hit her face, that awareness dawned. Dust Creek, not Pine Ridge. She had gotten off at the wrong station. Panic seized her as she turned back toward the train, but it was already pulling away, leaving her stranded in a cloud of dust and steam. Clara stood frozen, her valise clutched to her chest, watching her planned future disappear down the tracks. The platform was small, just a wooden structure with a tiny station house. Unlike the bustling stations back east, this one was nearly deserted. A few tumbleweeds skittered across the boards, and an old hound dog slept in the shade of a bench. "Mr. Jameson?" Clara called hesitantly, though she knew it was futile. "Harold Jameson?" Only the mournful cry of a hawk overhead answered her. Clara fumbled in her reticule for the telegram she'd received, confirming the arrangements. Her eyes widened as she noticed the details she'd overlooked in her nervous excitement. "We'll meet you at Pine Ridge Station. Look for red neckerchief and green wagon. H. Jameson." "Oh no," she whispered, pressing a hand to her corseted stomach. "Oh no, no, no." She was at the wrong station, miles from where she should be, with no money for another ticket, and the next train wouldn't come through for 3 days. What had she done? She'd left everything behind, her position, her boarding house room, her few friends, for the promise of a new life with a stranger. And now she couldn't even manage to get off at the correct station. "Papa! Papa! Come quick!" A child's voice rang out across the dusty main street that ran alongside the platform. Clara turned to see a little girl racing toward her, brown braids flying behind her, patched calico dress fluttering in the wind. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with huge brown eyes that sparkled with feverish excitement. "Papa, she's here! She's finally here!" The child skidded to a stop just inches from Clara's skirts, staring up at her with wonder. "You're even prettier than I imagined, and you smell like flowers, just like Mama used to." Before Clara could respond, the girl threw her arms around her waist, burying her face in the blue silk. "I knew God would answer. I knew it. I prayed every single night, and He sent you." I, I think there's been some mistake," Clara stammered, gently trying to disengage the child's fierce embrace. "I'm not who you think I am, little one." But the girl only held on tighter. "You came on the train, didn't you? You're wearing a beautiful dress, and you have golden hair just like in my dream. You're the mama God sent us." Sophie Marie Carter, you let go of that lady this instant." A man's deep voice boomed across the street, and Clara looked up to see a figure striding toward them with long, purposeful steps. As he drew closer, she could make out his features. Sun-weathered skin, dark hair that needed cutting, broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor. He wore simple work clothes, dusty from a day's toil, and his gray eyes held a mixture of embarrassment and something else. Was it sorrow? "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am," he said as he reached them, gently but firmly pulling the girl away from Clara. "My daughter, she's been going through a difficult time since her mother passed. Sophie, you need to apologize to this lady for bothering her." "But Papa," Sophie protested, her lower lip trembling, "she's the one I told you about, the one from my dreams. God sent her to be our new mama." The man's face flushed red beneath his tan. "Sophie, we've talked about this. You can't just claim every woman who comes to town as your mother." He turned to Clara. "I'm sorry, ma'am. She doesn't mean any harm." Clara found herself studying the man before her. Despite his rough appearance, there was a gentleness in the way he handled his daughter, a protective quality that spoke of a devoted father. His hands, though calloused and strong, were careful as they rested on Sophie's small shoulders. "It's quite all right," Clara said, managing a small smile despite her own predicament. "No harm done, though I'm afraid I'm in a bit of trouble myself. You see, I was supposed to get off at Pine Ridge Station, not here. I meant to meet someone there, and now I'm stranded until the next train comes through." The man frowned, his gray eyes showing concern. "Pine Ridge is a good 30 miles from here, ma'am. And you said the next train isn't for 3 days?" Clara nodded, feeling the weight of her situation pressing down on her shoulders. "Yes, I'm afraid so. Is there perhaps a hotel in town where I might stay?" Or someone who might drive me to Pine Ridge. There's no hotel in Dust Creek. Ma'am, it's not much more than a watering stop for the railroad. He rubbed the back of his neck, thinking. As for getting to Pine Ridge, the roads are rough, and with the recent rains, Miller's Creek is running high. It would be dangerous to attempt the crossing, especially for someone not familiar with the territory. Clara felt her heart sink. What options did she have? She couldn't sleep on the platform for 3 days, and she had maybe enough money for a few meals, certainly not enough to hire someone to make such a dangerous journey. Sophie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly piped up. She can stay with us, Papa. We have the extra room, the one we don't use anymore. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Clara knew immediately which room the child meant. Her mother's room. The awkward silence stretched between them until he finally sighed. Ma'am, I know you don't know us from Adam, but my daughter's right. We do have a spare room, and it wouldn't be Christian to leave a lady stranded with nowhere to stay. Our ranch isn't much, but you're welcome to shelter there until you can catch the next train or figure out other arrangements. Clara studied his face, searching for any sign of impropriety in the offer, but found only genuine concern and perhaps a hint of weariness. She glanced down at Sophie, whose eyes were bright with hope, small hands clasped together as if in prayer. I wouldn't want to impose, Clara began, but even as she said it, she knew she had few alternatives. It's no imposition, the man said firmly. My sister-in-law lives just down the road, so there will be no question of propriety. She helps with Sophie when I'm working the cattle. You'd be doing us a favor, really. He smiled slightly. Sophie could use some company that isn't an old ranch hand or her ornery Aunt Margaret. Aunt Margaret says I talk too much, Sophie confided to Clara in a whisper that wasn't quite quiet enough. She says I'm wild as a Mustang and need a firm hand. But you won't think I talk too much, will you? You look like you like stories. Mama used to love my stories. Clara's heart melted a little at the child's earnestness. She found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. All right then, Miss Daniel Carter, and this little chatterbox is Sophie. Clara Ellison, she replied, offering her hand, which he shook briefly, his calloused palm rough against her gloved fingers. And I do love stories, Sophie. The little girl beamed as if Clara had just offered her the moon. Daniel hefted Clara's traveling cases with an ease that spoke of his physical strength. The wagon's just over here, Miss Ellison. It's about a 20-minute ride to the ranch. As they walked toward a dusty wagon that had seen better days, Clara couldn't help but notice the contrast between this simple, work-worn vehicle and the green-painted wagon she'd been expecting to see. The horses were sturdy but unremarkable, and the bench seat had been mended multiple times with different colored threads. Daniel helped her up onto the seat with surprising gentleness, his hands careful and respectful. Sophie scrambled up between them, practically vibrating with excitement. Papa, can I show her the chickens when we get home? And the new calf? Oh, and my special spot by the creek where the wild roses grow? Let Miss Ellison get settled first, Sophie, Daniel said, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion. She's had a long journey. As they rolled away from the station, Clara took in the landscape around her. The terrain was nothing like Boston's gentle hills and established trees. Here the land stretched endlessly, painted in shades of brown and gold, punctuated by scrub brush and the occasional juniper. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks purple against the bright blue sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that both frightened and exhilarated her. Where are you from, Miss Ellison? Daniel asked, his eyes fixed on the rough road ahead. Boston, Clara replied. I was a teacher at the Ladies' Academy there. A teacher, Sophie exclaimed. Did you teach reading? I love reading, but Papa says I read too fast and don't save any books for later. We've read all the books we have 3 times already. Sophie, Daniel warned gently. It's fine, Clara said, surprising herself with a genuine smile. I did teach reading, among other subjects, literature, penmanship, a bit of arithmetic, and deportment. What's deportment? Sophie asked, scrunching her nose. It's learning how to behave like a proper lady, Clara explained. Sophie considered this. Aunt Margaret says I need to learn that. She says I'm wild as a prairie wind. She paused. But I think the prairie wind is beautiful, don't you? It sings sometimes, especially at night. Clara found herself charmed by the child's poetic observation. I think you were right. The wind does sing. As they traveled, Sophie kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about each one. That's where Papa found me when I got lost last spring. I was following a butterfly and didn't realize how far I'd gone. And over there, that's where we saw the golden eagle. Papa says they're good luck. Daniel occasionally interjected with a quiet correction or gentle reminder to breathe between sentences, but Clara could see the deep affection in his eyes when he looked at his daughter. It was clear that despite their apparent struggles, these two had a bond forged by shared loss and mutual devotion. How long has it been? Clara asked quietly while Sophie was distracted by a jackrabbit racing alongside the wagon. Since your wife? Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the reins. 2 years come September. Fever took her. The doc said there was nothing could be done. He paused, then added, Sophie was only 5. It's been difficult. Clara could hear the understatement in his words. A man trying to run a ranch while raising a young daughter alone, dealing with his own grief while helping a child through hers. She thought of her own losses, her parents' death when she was 17, the fiancé who had broken their engagement when he found someone with a larger dowry. They seemed smaller somehow, compared to what this man and child had endured. Papa does everything now, Sophie said, apparently having given up on catching the jackrabbit with her eyes. He makes breakfast and braids my hair, though not as good as Mama did, and reads to me every night, even when he's so tired he falls asleep in the middle of sentences. Sophie, Daniel said, embarrassment coloring his voice. It's true, Sophie insisted. Last week you fell asleep right when David was about to fight Goliath, and I had to poke you awake because I needed to know what happened, even though we've read it 20 times. Despite himself, Daniel chuckled. She's right. I'm not much of a substitute for her mother, I'm afraid. You're doing wonderfully, Papa, Sophie said with such fierce loyalty that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You're the best papa in the whole territory. In the whole world, probably. The ranch, when it came into view, was modest but well-maintained. The main house was built of adobe and timber with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. There was a barn that looked newer than the house, several corrals, and what appeared to be a thriving vegetable garden protected by a fence that was fighting a losing battle against the rabbits, judging by the patches that had been recently mended. It's not much, Daniel said, a note of apology in his voice as he helped Clara down from the wagon. It's lovely, Clara said, and meant it. There was something honest about the place, something real and solid that her life in Boston had lacked. You've built a good home here. Daniel looked surprised by the compliment, as if he hadn't expected someone from the city to appreciate his simple ranch. Thank you, Miss Ellison. I'll show you to your room so you can get settled. The inside of the house was clean, but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, and while everything was tidy, there were no curtains at the windows, no tablecloth on the rough wooden table, no pictures on the walls save for a single photograph on the mantel. A woman with Sophie's eyes and Daniel's smile, frozen in sepia tones. Sophie must have noticed Clara looking at the photograph. That's Mama, she said softly. She was beautiful, wasn't she? Very beautiful, Clara agreed. She used to sing while she cooked, Sophie continued. And she made the best apple pie in the territory. Papa tries, but his crust is always tough. I'm standing right here, you know, Daniel said with mock offense. Sophie giggled, the melancholy moment passing. Can you cook, Miss Clara? Sophie, don't be rude, Daniel admonished. I can, Clara said. In fact, if you'd allow me, Mr. Carter, I'd be happy to prepare dinner tonight. It's the least I can do to repay your hospitality. Daniel looked like he might protest, but Sophie jumped in before he could. Oh, please, Papa. We've had beans and biscuits for 3 days straight. There's nothing wrong with beans and biscuits, Daniel said defensively. But Clara caught the gleam of hope in his eyes. Perhaps I could make something a little different, and Clara suggested. If you have the supplies, that is. Daniel showed her to the kitchen, which was better stocked than she'd expected. There was flour, salt pork, preserved vegetables, dried beans, and even some precious white sugar. My sister-in-law Margaret brings supplies once a week, he explained. She thinks we'll starve otherwise. Aunt Margaret can't cook either, Sophie whispered conspiratorially. She burns everything because she's too busy talking about what's proper and what's not. Sophie Marie, Daniel warned, but his lips twitched with suppressed amusement. Clara spent the next hour preparing a simple but hearty meal. As she worked, Sophie sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly doing her letters, but really watching Clara's every move with fascination. "You move like you're dancing," Sophie observed. "Mama used to move like that when she cooked." Clara paused in her stirring, touched by the comparison. "Your mama must have been a wonderful cook." "She was wonderful at everything," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "Papa says I have her spirit." "I can see that," Clara said, noting the way the child's eyes sparkled with life, despite the sadness that occasionally dimmed them. Daniel came in from tending the animals just as Clara was setting the table. He stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. The table properly set, steam rising from dishes that actually matched, his daughter chattering happily as she helped carry plates. "I haven't seen her this animated in months," he said quietly, so only Clara could hear. Dinner was a revelation. Daniel ate like a man who'd forgotten food could be more than mere sustenance. Sophie talked nonstop between bites, telling Clara about everything from her favorite hiding spots to her theory that their rooster was actually a prince under a curse. "This is the best meal I've had in 2 years," Daniel finally said, pushing back from his empty plate. "Thank you, Miss Ellison." "It was my pleasure," Clara said, and found she meant it. There was something deeply satisfying about watching this little family enjoy her cooking, something that filled a hollow space she hadn't known existed in her chest. After dinner, Clara insisted on cleaning up despite Daniel's protests. Sophie helped dry dishes, standing on a wooden crate to reach the counter, still talking a mile a minute. "Do you know any songs, Miss Clara?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Mama used to sing to me every night before bed. Papa tries, but he says he sounds like a crow with a sore throat." "I do not," Daniel protested from where he was sitting by the fire, mending a bridle. "You do too," Sophie said cheerfully. "Remember when you tried to sing Amazing Grace at the church social?" Mrs. Henderson's baby started crying. Clara laughed, a real genuine laugh that surprised her. When was the last time she'd laughed like that? "I do know some songs," she admitted. "Would you like me to sing one while we finish up here?" Sophie nodded eagerly, and even Daniel looked up from his work with interest. Clara began with Shenandoah, her clear soprano voice filling the small kitchen. Sophie stopped drying dishes to listen, her eyes wide with wonder. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "You have a beautiful voice, Miss Ellison," Daniel said softly. "Thank you for sharing it with us." "Sing another," Sophie pleaded. "Please." So Clara sang Barbara Allen while they finished the dishes, and then The Water is Wide, while Sophie got ready for bed. By the time she tucked the little girl in, Daniel having given her permission when Sophie begged, the child's eyes were heavy with sleep. "Miss Clara," Sophie said drowsily, "I know you have to meet that man at the other station, but couldn't you just forget about him and stay here instead? We need you more than he does." Clara's heart clenched. "Oh, sweetheart. I prayed for you," Sophie continued, her voice getting softer as sleep pulled her under. "Every night since Mama went to heaven, I prayed God would send us someone. And he sent you. Even if it was to the wrong station, maybe it wasn't wrong at all." Clara smoothed the child's hair back from her forehead, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. When Sophie's breathing evened out into sleep, she quietly left the room. Daniel was waiting in the main room, 2 cups of coffee on the table beside him. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "She shouldn't have said those things, put you in that position." Clara sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "She's a wonderful little girl, Mr. Carter. You've done an amazing job with her." "I muddle through," Daniel said, but Clara could see the pleasure her words gave him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their coffee. Clara found herself studying the room in the soft lamplight, the worn but clean furniture, the few books stacked neatly on a shelf, the mended curtains that had clearly seen better days. Despite its simplicity, there was something welcoming about the space, something that felt like a home rather than just a house. "I should show you to your room," Daniel said eventually, rising. "You must be tired after your journey." The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a hand-sewn quilt, a washstand with a china basin, and a single window that looked out toward the mountains. Clara could tell it had been recently aired and dusted. "This was Emma's sewing room," Daniel said from the doorway. "She liked the morning light. Sophie was right. We don't use it anymore. Haven't been able to bring ourselves to change anything." Clara could see the evidence of the room's former purpose. A basket of fabric scraps in the corner, a half-finished sampler on the small table by the window. She moved closer to look at it, her fingers tracing the partially completed words. "Home is where." Daniel cleared his throat. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. Breakfast is usually around sunrise, but sleep as long as you need. Thank you, Mr. Carter, for everything." He nodded, his hand resting briefly on the doorframe. "Good night, Miss Ellison." After he left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, feeling both physically exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed. The day had been a whirlwind, from the panic of missing her stop to the unexpected warmth of this little family who had taken her in without question. She changed into her nightgown and performed her evening ablutions, then noticed a small drawer in the table that was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of her, and she gently pulled it open. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Clara knew she shouldn't pry, but something about it called to her. She carefully unfolded it, revealing a letter written in a delicate, feminine hand. "My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, I fear the worst has happened. The doctor says there's little hope, but I want you to know I face this without fear, only with sorrow that I must leave you and Sophie too soon. I've been praying every night that if I can't be with you, God will send someone who can. Someone who will love Sophie as her own, who will bring music back to our home, who will see the good man you are beneath your quiet strength. I've dreamed of her, Daniel. She has golden hair and kind eyes. She moves like she's dancing and sings like an angel. She's educated but not proud, gentle but not weak. When she comes, please don't turn away because of your grief for me. Love doesn't divide, it multiplies. All my love, now and always." Emma, Clara's hands trembled as she carefully refolded the letter and returned it to the drawer. She felt like an intruder now, reading such intimate thoughts. But more than that, she felt a strange sense of connection to the woman who had written those words. A woman whose description of her dream visitor sounded unsettlingly like Clara herself. Outside her window, a coyote howled in the distance, and the prairie wind sang its lonely song. Clara slipped between the cool sheets, her mind whirling with all that had happened and the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. "It's just a coincidence," she told herself firmly. "You got off at the wrong station, that's all. There's nothing mystical about it." Yet as she drifted towards sleep, her last conscious thought was that perhaps Sophie had been right. Perhaps there were no accidents. Perhaps the wrong station wasn't wrong at all. Clara woke to the golden light of dawn filtering through the small window. For a moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room with its sparse furnishings so different from her boarding house accommodations in Boston. Then memory flooded back. The wrong station, the Carter family, Emma's letter. She sat up, smoothing her hair back from her face. Outside, a rooster crowed insistently, and she could hear the distant sounds of movement from elsewhere in the house. Daniel must already be up and tending to his morning chores. Clara dressed quickly in her simple brown day dress, pinned her hair into a neat bun, and made her way to the kitchen. To her surprise, she found Sophie alone, standing on a wooden crate at the stove, her small face scrunched in concentration as she attempted to stir something in a cast-iron skillet. Flour dusted her dress and a smear of what looked like egg decorated her cheek. "Good morning, Sophie," Clara said gently, not wanting to startle the child. Sophie spun around, nearly toppling from her perch. "Miss Clara, I wanted to surprise you with breakfast, but—" She gestured helplessly at the lumpy mixture in the pan. "I think I did something wrong. It's supposed to be biscuits, but it's not rising." Clara moved to her side, examining the mixture. "Did you add baking powder?" Sophie's eyes widened. "Was I supposed to?" Clara smiled. "That's what makes the biscuits rise. Would you like me to help you start over?" "Would you?" Sophie's face lit up. "I want to learn how to cook proper, like Mama did. Papa tries to teach me, but he says cooking isn't his strong suit." "Then we'll learn together," Clara said, rolling up her sleeves. They spent the next hour cooking together, Clara patiently showing Sophie how to measure ingredients properly, how to handle the dough with a light touch to keep the biscuits tender. The child was an eager student, absorbing Clara's instructions with serious concentration. "Where's your father this morning?" Clara asked as they cut out perfect circles of dough. "Checking the fences in the north pasture," Sophie replied. "He always does that after a storm. He said to tell you he'd be back by midday and that you should make yourself at home." Clara was touched by the thoughtfulness. Most men she knew wouldn't have considered leaving such a message. As they worked, she found herself studying Sophie more closely. The child had Emma's eyes, soulful brown with long lashes, but Daniel's determined chin and straight nose. There was a quiet dignity to her that seemed beyond her years, perhaps born of losing her mother at such a young age. Yet beneath that was an irrepressible spirit that bubbled up in her curious questions and imaginative observations. "Miss Clara," Sophie said as they placed the biscuits on a baking sheet, "how come you're traveling all alone? Don't you have family?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to share. "My parents died when I was 17. I don't have any brothers or sisters." "Like me," Sophie said solemnly. "I don't have any brothers or sisters either. Mama was going to give me some, but then she got sick." She paused, flour-covered hands stilling. "It's lonely sometimes, isn't it? Being the only one?" The simple question caught Clara off guard with its perception. "Yes," she admitted, "it can be lonely. That's why I talk so much," Sophie confided, "to fill up the quiet. Aunt Margaret says it's unseemly, but Papa understands." Clara's heart ached for this small, wise child who had already experienced so much loss. "I think your Papa understands a great deal." They finished preparing breakfast, and when the biscuits emerged golden and fragrant from the oven, Sophie beamed with pride. "We did it. Wait until Papa sees." After they ate, Clara helped Sophie with her morning lessons. The child was bright, already reading well above what would be expected for her age, but her mathematical skills needed work. Clara patiently guided her through simple problems, using examples from ranch life to hold her interest. "So if your father has 20 cattle in the north pasture and 15 in the south, but sells 6 and buys 3 more, how many does he have altogether?" Sophie's brow furrowed in concentration as she worked through the problem. 32? That's right. Well done." The praise made Sophie glow. "You explain things better than Aunt Margaret. She just tells me to memorize the numbers, but you show me why they matter." Mid-morning, Sophie insisted on showing Clara around the property. They visited the chicken coop where each hen had been given a name. "That's Henrietta, and that's Queen Elizabeth, and the speckled one is Freckles." The vegetable garden where Sophie proudly pointed out the pumpkins she'd planted herself, and the barn where a new calf wobbled on spindly legs beside its mother. "And this," Sophie said, leading Clara down a small path behind the house, "is my special place." On their way to the creek, they passed a property line marked by a weathered fence. Beyond it stood a modest cabin, smoke curling lazily from its chimney despite the summer heat. "That's Mr. Winter's place," Sophie explained, pointing to the cabin. "He's our closest neighbor, but Papa says he's a hermit." "A hermit?" Clara asked, intrigued. Sophie nodded solemnly. "That means he likes being alone. He fought in the war, the big one, when the country was fighting itself. Papa says it changed him." The child's face brightened. "But he's nice to me. Shows me how to track animals and gives me peppermint candy when Papa brings him supplies." Clara studied the distant cabin. "He sounds interesting." "He is. He has the best stories, but he only tells them when he's in the right mood. Papa says Mr. Winters lost his family long ago, so he's adopted everyone else's." Sophie lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "He taught me to dance last Christmas. Said every young lady should know how, even if he had to stand on his confounded wooden leg to show me." "His wooden leg?" Clara echoed, surprised. "From the war," Sophie explained matter-of-factly. "He carved it himself. Says it works better than the fancy one the government tried to give him." She tugged at Clara's hand. "Come on, I'll show you the creek now. Maybe we'll see Mr. Winters later. He sometimes brings Papa fresh fish." Clara let herself be led onward, but glanced back once more at the cabin. There was something poignant about this solitary figure who had suffered loss yet still found it in himself to be kind to a motherless child. The territory was clearly filled with more complex characters than she had anticipated. They emerged at the bank of a small creek where wild roses grew in profusion despite the arid climate. The blossoms ranged from pale pink to deep crimson, their sweet scent perfuming the air. A large flat rock beside the water looked worn smooth, as if it had served as a seat for many years. Mom and I used to come here for picnics, Sophie explained, her voice soft with memory. She said the roses were like hope. They bloom even when the ground is hard. The child knelt, gently touching a particularly vibrant blossom. I come here when I miss her most. Sometimes I think I can hear her humming. Clara knelt beside her, touched by the sacred quality of this shared memory. Your mama sounds like she was very when. She was, Sophie agreed. She told me that beauty matters most when life is difficult. That's why she planted flowers even when money was tight. She looked up at Clara with those two perceptive eyes. You're like her that way. You brought beauty to our house last night, with your singing and your cooking. Clara didn't know how to respond to such unguarded praise. I'm glad I could bring you a little happiness, Sophie. The child nodded solemnly. You did. Papa, too. He smiled more yesterday than he has in ages. She plucked a rose and held it out to Clara. This is for you, so you'll remember us when you go to Pine Ridge. Clara accepted the bloom, its thorns carefully removed by Sophie's small fingers. Thank you. I doubt I could forget you if I tried. They spent the rest of the morning by the creek, Sophie regaling Clara with stories about her life on the ranch. The time she'd gotten lost following a butterfly. The winter when snow had piled so high they couldn't open the front door. The day her father had taught her to ride her own pony. When the sun reached its zenith, they headed back to the house. Daniel had returned and was washing up at the pump outside. His shirt clung to his broad shoulders, damp from his ablutions, and his hair curled damply at the nape of his neck. Clara felt a sudden improper flutter in her chest at the sight and quickly looked away. Papa, Sophie called, running ahead. Miss Clara and I made biscuits this morning, and they were perfect. And she helped me with my arithmetic, and we went to see the roses, and... Daniel laughed, catching his daughter mid-sentence. Slow down, sweetheart. Let Miss Ellison catch her breath before you talk her ear off. He set Sophie down and turned to Clara, his gray eyes warming. Good morning, Miss Ellison. I hope Sophie hasn't been too much trouble. Not at all, Clara assured him. She's been wonderful company. Daniel smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face, softening the lines of worry around his eyes. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I've been checking the fences. The storm brought a few down in the north pasture. Can they be fixed? Clara asked, surprising herself with her interest in ranch matters. With time and lumber, yes. He wiped his hands on a rough cloth hanging by the pump. Nothing that can't wait a day or two. I thought perhaps you might like to see a bit more of the territory while you're here. There's a nice view from Sunset Ridge, just a short wagon ride away. Sophie clapped her hands excitedly. Oh, yes. Can we have a picnic, Papa? Like we used to with Mama? A flash of pain crossed Daniel's face so quickly Clara almost missed it. If Miss Ellison would like that? Yes. Clara hesitated. It seemed improper somehow to step into this memory of family happiness. Yet the hopeful look on Sophie's face made refusal impossible. That sounds lovely. I'd be happy to prepare something. Already taken care of, Daniel said. Mrs. Patterson from town sent over some fried chicken and cornbread this morning. Said it was to welcome our visitor. Word travels fast, Clara observed. Daniel's mouth quirked in a half smile. In Dust Creek, the telegraph's the second fastest way to spread news. The first is telling Mrs. Patterson. They set off after the midday meal, the wagon loaded with a picnic basket, a quilt for sitting, and Sophie's boundless enthusiasm. The ride to Sunset Ridge took them through a landscape Clara found increasingly beautiful. Rolling hills covered in tall grasses that rippled like water in the breeze. Stands of cottonwoods marking the paths of hidden streams. Distant mesas rising like islands in an ocean of sky. It's so vast, Clara murmured, taking in the panorama. In Boston, buildings block the horizon everywhere you look. But here, Tess, it feels like you can see forever. Too empty for some, Daniel remarked. Emma's family thought she'd gone mad, coming out here with me. They were city folk, like you. And yet she loved it here, Clara said, remembering the letter. Daniel glanced at her curiously. She did, said the sky made her feel free. He hesitated. It's not for everyone, though. The winters are harsh, the summers brutal. We're miles from the nearest doctor, from proper society. It can be a lonely life. Clara heard the unspoken question in his words. Could she ever be happy in such a place? It wasn't meant for her, of course. Tomorrow she would board the train for Pine Ridge, would meet Harold Jameson, and begin the life she had planned. Yet she found herself imagining what it would be like to stay, to make this wild, beautiful land her home. I think, she said slowly, that loneliness depends less on where you live than on who you live with. Daniel's eyes met hers briefly, an unreadable expression crossing his face before he turned back to the road. That's true enough. Sunset Ridge proved to be a gentle hill topped with a cluster of wind-sculpted boulders. From its summit, the view was breathtaking. Miles of territory in every direction. The mountains to the west tipped with snow, even in summer. The ribbon of the creek winding through the valley below. Sophie immediately claimed a boulder shaped like a chair, her legs swinging as she pointed out landmarks to Clara. That's Mr. Winter's ranch over there. He has the most cattle in the whole territory. And see that ribbon of green? That's Miller's Creek, the one Papa said was too dangerous to cross after the storm. And way over there, where the mountains meet the plains, that's Indian territory. Daniel spread the quilt in the shade of a gnarled juniper and began unpacking the picnic basket. Clara moved to help him, their hands brushing accidentally as they both reached for the same bundle. She felt a jolt at the contact, like a static spark but warmer, and quickly withdrew. I'm sorry, she murmured. No need, Daniel said quietly. It's just, he cleared his throat. It's been a while since I shared a picnic with anyone but Sophie. The simple admission touched Clara deeply. She could imagine how lonely his life had been these past 2 years, working from dawn to dusk, raising a child, grieving his wife, with no one to share the burden. They ate beneath the wide blue sky, with Sophie chattering about her plans to train a prairie dog she'd spotted near the garden, Daniel occasionally interjecting with a gentle correction or a droll observation that made Clara laugh. It was, she realized with a start, the most pleasant afternoon she'd spent in years. After they'd eaten, Sophie wandered off to collect wildflowers that grew among the rocks, leaving Clara and Daniel alone on the quilt. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the whisper of wind through the juniper and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. May I ask you something, Miss Ellison? Daniel said finally. Of course. Why would a woman like you, educated, refined, clearly capable, answer a mail-order bride advertisement? It seems, he hesitated, searching for the right word. Unusual. Clara considered how to answer. The truth was complex, layered with her fears and hopes, her disappointments and pragmatism. After my parents died, I had to make my own way in the world. Teaching was respectable, and I was good at it. I thought perhaps I had found my place. She smoothed a wrinkle from her skirt. Then I met Robert. Your young man, Daniel guessed. Clara nodded. We were engaged for nearly a year. I thought he loved me, but when a banker's daughter with a substantial dowry showed interest. She shrugged, the old hurt dulled but still present. He made what he called a practical decision. I wasn't enough. Daniel frowned. The man sounds like a fool. The simple declaration, offered without platitudes or pity, made Clara smile despite herself. Perhaps, but it taught me something about the nature of love. It's unreliable. I decided that practicality might serve me better. When I lost my position at the academy, Mr. Jameson's advertisement seemed like an opportunity for security, for a home of my own, for a fresh start. And now you're stuck in Dust Creek instead of meeting your intended, Daniel said, a note of apology in his voice. Yes, Clara agreed. But even as she said it, she wondered if stuck was the right word. There was something about this place, about the Carters, that felt oddly right, as if she had found something she hadn't known she was seeking. Well, for what it's worth, Daniel said, I think your Mr. Jameson is a lucky man, even if he doesn't know it yet. Before Clara could respond, Sophie came running back, her hands full of wildflowers in purple and yellow. Look what I found. Aren't they beautiful? Can we take some home for the table? Of course, sweetheart, Daniel said, his expression softening as it always did when he looked at his daughter. But we should head back soon. It looks like more weather coming in. Clara followed his gaze to the western horizon where dark clouds were beginning to gather. The idyllic afternoon was drawing to a close, just as her time with the Carters was nearly over. Tomorrow she would board the train for Pine Ridge, would meet Harold Jameson, would become his wife. The thought, which had once filled her with hopeful anticipation, now left her strangely hollow. They packed up the remains of their picnic and headed back to the ranch, the approaching storm hastening their journey. By the time they reached the house, the wind had picked up, bending the tall grasses and sending dust devils spiraling across the yard. "Looks like a big one coming," Daniel observed as he helped Clara down from the wagon. "Good thing we got back when we did." Inside, Clara helped Sophie arrange her wildflowers in a mason jar filled with water. The simple bouquet brightened the kitchen table, a splash of color against the worn wood. "They're prairie beauties," Sophie informed her seriously. "Mama said they're special because they only bloom after it rains. They wait all year, saving up their prettiness for just the right moment." Clara smiled at the child's poetic description. "Your mama sounds like she was very wise about many things." "She was," Sophie agreed. "Papa says I have her way of seeing beauty in ordinary things." She hesitated, then asked in a small voice, "Do you think she can see us from heaven? Do you think she knows I still remember everything she taught me?" The question caught Clara off guard, its innocent wisdom piercing straight to her heart. "I think," she said carefully, "that love like that doesn't just disappear. I think your mama's love is still here, in this house, in your memories, in the way your father looks at you. And yes, I think she knows you remember." Sophie considered this, then nodded solemnly. "That's what I think too." She touched one of the purple blossoms gently. "I'm going to put some of these by her picture." As the child carefully selected flowers from the jar, Daniel entered the kitchen, his arms full of firewood. "Storm's nearly here," he said, depositing the logs by the fireplace. "Might lose power if the lines go down. I've brought in extra lamps and candles just in case." The first raindrops began to patter against the roof, quickly increasing to a steady drumming. Lightning flashed, illuminating the kitchen in stark white light, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that made the windows rattle in their frames. "It's a big one," Daniel observed. "Good night to be indoors." They settled in for the evening, the storm raging outside while inside the house grew cozy with lamplight and the scent of the stew Clara had prepared. After dinner, they gathered in the main room, Daniel tending the fire while Sophie curled up with her new book of fairy tales and Clara mended a tear in the child's Sunday dress. The simple domesticity of the scene struck Clara forcibly. It was a tableau of family life, ordinary yet profound, the kind of evening she had imagined sharing with her parents had they lived, or perhaps with Robert, in another life. Yet here she was, a near stranger, slipping so easily into this intimate circle that it felt almost like coming home. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the house, making Sophie look up from her book with wide eyes. "That sounded like a banshee," she said. "Mrs. Patterson told me banshees scream when someone's about to—" "It's just the wind in the chimney," Daniel interrupted quickly. "Nothing to be frightened of." But Clara noticed how his jaw tightened, how his hands stilled momentarily on the poker he was using to stir the fire. Of course, Emma had died during a fever. Every storm, every illness must bring that memory rushing back. "Perhaps we could use some music to drown out the storm," she suggested, wanting to distract both father and daughter from dark thoughts. "Sophie, would you like me to teach you a song?" Sophie's face lit up. "Yes, please." For the next hour, Clara taught Sophie simple rounds and folk songs, the kind she had learned as a child. The little girl had a sweet, true voice and a quick ear, picking up melodies after hearing them just once or twice. Even Daniel joined in occasionally, his deep baritone surprisingly melodious despite his earlier protestations about his singing ability. "You have a lovely voice, Mr. Carter," Clara observed during a pause. "I think you've been too modest about your musical talents." Daniel looked embarrassed but pleased. "Emma was the musical one. She played the piano, not that we could afford one out here, but she sang all the time, taught Sophie her first songs." His expression grew distant. "Sometimes the house feels too quiet without her music." "But now we have Miss Clara," Sophie said, stifling a yawn, "and she knows lots of songs." "Indeed she does," Daniel agreed, his eyes meeting Clara's over his daughter's head. But I think it's past someone's bedtime. Despite Sophie's token protest, it was clear the excitement of the day had worn her out. Her eyes were already drooping as Daniel lifted her into his arms. "Can Miss Clara tuck me in again?" she asked sleepily. Daniel glanced at Clara, a question in his eyes. She nodded, touched by the child's request. "If she doesn't mind," he said. "I'd be happy to," Clara assured them. She followed Daniel down the short hallway to Sophie's room, a small space made cheerful with a colorful quilt and childish drawings pinned to the walls. He settled Sophie on the bed and stepped back, allowing Clara to help the drowsy child into her nightgown and braid her hair for sleep. "Will you sing to me?" Sophie asked, her voice already blurring with drowsiness. The one about the water being wide. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and began the old Scottish ballad, her voice soft in the lamplit room. Sophie's eyes drifted closed before the first verse was complete, but Clara continued, aware of Daniel standing in the doorway listening. When she finished, she tucked the blankets more securely around the sleeping child and rose. Daniel was still watching, an unreadable expression on his face. "You're good with her, he said quietly as they made their way back to the main room. "Natural, like you've been doing it for years." "She makes it easy," Clara replied. "She's a remarkable child." "She is that." Pride and love mingled in his voice. "Too wise for her years sometimes. Sees too much." Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the sky. Inside, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting the room in a soft golden light. Clara was acutely aware of being alone with Daniel, of the impropriety of the situation despite the sleeping child down the hall, of the strange intimacy that had developed between them in just 2 days. "I should retire," she said, suddenly needing distance from the conflicting emotions swirling within her. "It's been a long day." "Of course," Daniel moved to light a lamp for her. "But before you go, I wanted to ask," he hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "Have you given any thought to what you'll do if Mr. Jameson isn't what you expected?" The question took Clara by surprise. "I'm not sure I understand." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "It's just, people can be different in person than they are on paper. Letters can hide a great deal." Clara thought of Harold Jameson's precise, formal letters, revealing so little of the man behind them. "I suppose that's true. If you arrive in Pine Ridge and find that Mr. Jameson isn't a man you could be happy with, what then?" It was a question Clara hadn't allowed herself to consider. Her entire future depended on this arrangement working out. She had no home to return to, no position waiting for her. "I don't have many alternatives," she admitted. Daniel took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell the clean scent of soap and wood smoke that clung to him. "You could have," he said quietly. "Alternatives, I mean." Clara's heart began to beat faster. "Mr. Carter." "Daniel," he corrected gently. "After everything, I think we could use our given names, don't you?" "Daniel," she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "What are you saying?" He took a deep breath as if steeling himself. "I'm saying that if Pine Ridge doesn't work out, or even if it might, you'd be welcome here. Not as a guest, but as—" He trailed off, clearly struggling to find the right words. "As what?" Clara pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. "As whatever you wish to be," he finished. "To Sophie, to me, to this house that hasn't felt like a home since Emma died. Until you came." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Clara felt dizzy with the implications, with the sudden wild hope that perhaps there was another path for her, one she hadn't dared to consider. "I hardly know what to say," she managed. "You don't have to say anything now," Daniel assured her. "Just think about it, before you make any final decisions." A particularly loud crack of thunder made them both start, breaking the tension of the moment. Clara took a step back, needing to clear her head. "I should go to bed," she repeated, her voice unsteady. Daniel nodded, disappointment flashing briefly across his face before he schooled his features back to polite neutrality. "Of course. Good night, Clara." "Good night, Daniel." In her room, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her mind whirling with the implications of Daniel's words. Had he really just suggested that she might stay? that there might be a place for her here, with him and Sophie. It seemed impossible that in just 2 days this man and his daughter had come to care for her enough to want her to remain. And yet, hadn't she felt it too? This strange sense of rightness, of belonging, as if she had found a place she hadn't known she was seeking? The thought of boarding the train tomorrow, of leaving them behind to meet a stranger she knew only through formal, impersonal letters, filled her with a surprising dread. Clara moved to the window, watching the storm rage across the landscape. Lightning illuminated the yard in brief, stark flashes, followed by rolling thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The wild beauty of it matched the tumult in her own heart. A soft knock at her door startled her from her reverie. She opened it to find Sophie standing there in her nightgown, her small face pale in the lamplight. "I had a bad dream," the child whispered. "About Mama. She was calling for me, but I couldn't find her." Clara knelt down, opening her arms, and Sophie fell into them, her thin shoulders trembling. "It was just a dream, sweetheart," Clara murmured, stroking the child's hair. "Just a dream." "Can I stay with you?" Sophie asked, her voice small and afraid. "Just until I'm not scared anymore?" Clara hesitated, unsure of the propriety, but the child's need outweighed convention. "Of course you can." She settled Sophie in the narrow bed, tucking the quilt around her and smoothing back her hair. "Would you like me to sing to you again?" Sophie nodded, her eyes already growing heavy once more. Clara began a lullaby, soft and low, watching as the child's features gradually relaxed into sleep. When she was certain Sophie was deeply asleep, Clara carefully eased herself from the bed, intending to find Daniel and let him know where his daughter was. She opened the door quietly, only to find him already standing in the hallway, clearly having come to check on them. "I heard her get up," he explained in a whisper. "She has nightmares during storms." "She's asleep now," Clara told him. "She asked to stay with me. I hope that's all right." "Of course," Daniel's face softened as he looked past Clara to his sleeping daughter. "Thank you for comforting her." It was no trouble. Clara stepped into the hallway, closing the door partway to avoid waking Sophie. "She said she dreamed of her mother." Daniel nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "She often does, during storms. Emma, the fever took her during a storm like this. Sophie was there when she—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Clara's heart ached for both of them, for the trauma they had endured, for the void left in their lives by Emma's passing. Without thinking, she reached out, touching Daniel's arm in a gesture of comfort. "I'm so sorry." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability that made him look younger, less weathered by grief and responsibility. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, "I meant what I said earlier, about you staying." "I know," she whispered. "It's not just for Sophie's sake, it's—" He broke off, frustration evident in the set of his jaw. "I'm not good with words. Not like this." "You're doing fine," Clara assured him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Daniel took a deep breath. "When Emma died, I thought that was it for me, that I'd had my chance at happiness, and now my only job was to raise Sophie as best I could. I never expected to feel, to want." He struggled, then finally said simply, "I never expected you." The raw honesty in his voice, in his eyes, took Clara's breath away. In that moment, all her careful plans, her practical decisions about her future, seemed to dissolve in the face of something both terrifying and exhilarating. The possibility of a connection she had never anticipated, never allowed herself to hope for. "I need to think," she said finally. "This is all happening so quickly." "I know." Daniel stepped back, giving her space. "I'm not asking for an answer now, just before you get on that train tomorrow. Think about what might be possible. Here, with us." A flash of lightning illuminated the hallway, casting Daniel's face in stark relief. The strong line of his jaw, the gentle curve of his mouth, the hope and fear mingled in his eyes. For a brief, wild moment, Clara wanted nothing more than to step forward, to close the distance between them. Propriety be damned. Instead, she nodded. "I will," she promised. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Clara." She slipped back into the room, closing the door softly behind her. Sophie slept peacefully, undisturbed by the storm that still raged outside or the emotional tempest within Clara's heart. Clara moved to the window again, watching the rain lash against the glass. Tomorrow she would have to decide: board the train for Pine Ridge and the secure but unknown future she had planned, or stay here in Dust Creek with Daniel and Sophie, taking a chance on a connection that had formed with startling speed but undeniable strength. Her mother's journal lay on the small table by the bed. Clara picked it up, thumbing through the familiar pages until she found the passage she sought. Some call me the fool for choosing love over security. Perhaps I am, but I would rather be a fool who has known real happiness than a wise woman who has only known safe contentment. Outside, the storm began to abate, the spaces between lightning and thunder growing longer. Inside, Clara Ellison, who had always prided herself on her practical nature, found herself contemplating the most impractical decision of her life. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Clara woke to find Sophie still sleeping beside her. One small hand curled trustingly against Clara's shoulder. For a moment, she simply watched the child breathe, taking in the long lashes resting against her cheeks, the slight furrow between her brows as she dreamed. What would it be like, Clara wondered, to wake up like this every day? To be this child's mother in truth, not just in her imagination? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had focused instead on her teaching career, her independence. Yet something about Sophie, her intelligence, her resilience, her open heart, called to Clara in a way she hadn't expected. And then there was Daniel. His unexpected declaration the night before had shifted everything, had forced her to acknowledge feelings she'd been trying to ignore. In just 2 days, he had become more real to her than Harold Jameson had in months of correspondence. Sophie stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Miss Clara?" she murmured, still half asleep. "You're still here." "Yes, sweetheart, I'm still here." The child smiled, a drowsy, contented expression. "Good, I dreamed you were leaving." Clara smoothed Sophie's tousled hair. "The train doesn't come until this afternoon." "But you don't have to go," Sophie said, suddenly more alert. "Papa said you could stay if you wanted to." "Did he tell you that?" "He said he was going to." "He did tell me," Clara confirmed, wondering just how much Daniel had shared with his daughter about his intentions. "And do you want to stay?" The hope in Sophie's eyes was almost painful to behold. "It's complicated, sweetheart," Clara hedged, not wanting to make promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I made a commitment to Mr. Jameson. I can't simply not show up." Sophie's face fell. "But you could write him a letter. Explain that you found us instead." She sat up, suddenly animated. "You could tell him that God sent you to the wrong station on purpose because we needed you more." Despite the gravity of the situation, Clara had to smile at the child's simple logic. "Perhaps, but I need to think carefully before I make such a big decision." "How will you know what's right?" Sophie asked, her head tilted in genuine curiosity. It was a profound question, one that Clara had been asking herself all night. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted, "but I think when it's right you feel it. Not just in your head, but in your heart." Sophie nodded solemnly. "That's what Mama used to say, that the most important answers are the ones your heart knows before your head catches up." She slipped out of bed, straightening her nightgown. "I'm going to get dressed. Papa's probably making breakfast, and he always burns the oatmeal if I don't watch him." After the child left, Clara dressed slowly, her mind still turning over the decision that lay before her. By this evening, she would either be in Pine Ridge, meeting Harold Jameson as planned, or she would be here beginning a new and unexpected chapter of her life. The smell of coffee drew her to the kitchen, where she found Daniel at the stove stirring a pot of oatmeal while Sophie set the table. The domestic scene struck her anew with its simple rightness, as if she had stumbled upon a painting titled Family Morning. "Good morning," she said from the doorway. Daniel turned, his face lighting with a smile that made her heart skip. "Good morning. Sleep well?" Eventually, Clara admitted, after the storm passed. Their eyes held for a moment, the memory of their midnight conversation hanging between them. Then Sophie broke the tension with her usual exuberance. "Papa didn't burn the oatmeal today, and we have honey to put on top. Do you like honey, Miss Clara?" I do, Clara said, grateful for the child's natural ability to ease awkward moments. It's my favorite. They ate breakfast together, the conversation deliberately light, all three carefully avoiding mention of the train that would arrive that afternoon, of the decision Clara had yet to make. After the meal, Sophie went to feed the chickens, leaving Clara and Daniel alone at the table. I want to apologize, he said after a moment, for last night. I shouldn't have. It wasn't proper of me to put you in such a position. Please don't apologize, Clara said quickly. Your honesty was refreshing. Daniel studied her face as if trying to read her thoughts. Have you decided what you're going to do? Clara shook her head. Not yet. It's a big decision. It is, he agreed. And I want you to make the one that's right for you, not for Sophie, not for me, for yourself. He hesitated, then added, whatever you decide, I want you to know these past few days they've meant something to both of us. Before Clara could respond, there was a knock at the front door. Daniel frowned. That'll be Margaret. She usually checks in after a big storm. Sure enough, when he opened the door, Clara heard a woman's voice, brisk and no nonsense. Daniel Carter, I hope you had sense enough to bring in extra firewood before that deluge hit. And where's Sophie? That child had better not have been out in this mud, or her good dress will be ruined beyond salvaging. A moment later, Daniel returned to the kitchen, accompanied by a stern-faced woman in her 50s, dressed in severe black despite the heat, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She stopped short at the sight of Clara, her eyebrows rising nearly to her hairline. Well, she said, her gaze sweeping Clara from head to toe. You must be the woman from the train. Margaret Thornton, Daniel's sister-in-law. Clara Ellison, Clara replied, extending her hand, which Margaret shook briefly, her grip firm and cool. From Boston, I understand, Margaret continued, her tone making it clear that Boston was barely a step above barbarism in her estimation. And on your way to Pine Ridge to meet your intended. Yes, Clara confirmed, though she found herself reluctant to discuss it. Margaret turned to Daniel. The Pattersons say the train will be late today. Track damage from the storm. Probably won't arrive until evening. Daniel's face remained carefully neutral, but Clara caught the flicker of relief in his eyes. A few more hours together before she had to decide. That's good to know, he said. Thank you for letting us know. Margaret's sharp eyes missed nothing, darting between Daniel and Clara with open suspicion. Yes, well, I thought I should check on Sophie as well. Make sure she's keeping up with her lessons despite your visitor. Miss Clara's been helping me with my arithmetic, Sophie announced, bouncing into the kitchen with perfect timing, her hands still dusty from feeding the chickens. And she taught me how to make proper biscuits, and she knows all sorts of songs, and… Sophie Marie Carter, Margaret interrupted, what have I told you about washing your hands after tending to those filthy birds? Sophie's exuberance dimmed visibly. To always do it right away, she mumbled, moving to the wash basin. Margaret turned back to Clara, her expression softening slightly. She's a good child, but wild as the wind, needs a firm hand and proper guidance. Emma was always too lenient with her. Clara bristled at the criticism of both Sophie and her dead mother, but kept her expression neutral. She seems like a very bright, loving child to me. Oh, she is that, Margaret agreed, but brightness without direction can lead a girl astray. She fixed Clara with a pointed look. I understand you're a teacher. What subjects? Literature, music, mathematics, deportment, Clara listed. I taught at the Boston Ladies Academy for 5 years. Margaret looked marginally impressed. A respectable institution, and now you're to be married to a rancher in Pine Ridge? Quite a change in circumstances. Yes, Clara agreed, unwilling to elaborate further. Margaret seemed about to press for more details when Daniel intervened. Margaret, would you like some coffee? Clara made it this morning, best I've had in years. His sister-in-law looked momentarily torn between continuing her interrogation and accepting the offer of fresh coffee. Coffee won. Well, I suppose I could stay for a cup. As Daniel poured the coffee, Margaret settled at the table, her posture rigid as a schoolmistress. So, Miss Ellison, tell me about this gentleman you're traveling to meet. What's his name? What sort of ranch does he run? Clara hesitated, uncomfortable with the direct questioning. His name is Harold Jameson. He has a cattle ranch near Pine Ridge. We've corresponded for several months. Jameson. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Not Harold Jameson of the Double J Ranch? Yes, I believe that's right, Clara confirmed, surprised. Do you know him? Margaret's lips thinned. I know of him. He's been widowed twice. Both wives died in unusual circumstances. Margaret, Daniel said warningly, you shouldn't spread gossip. It's not gossip if it's the truth, his sister-in-law retorted. The first Mrs. Jameson fell down the stairs and broke her neck. The second caught a fever that turned to pneumonia because he wouldn't send for the doctor until it was too late. She fixed Clara with a stern gaze. They say he's tight with money, keeps his women like servants, not educated men like some. Clara felt a chill creep up her spine. Could it be true? She had no way of knowing. Harold's letters had been proper but revealed little of his true character. The possibility that she might be walking into an unhappy or even dangerous situation had never occurred to her. I'm sure Miss Ellison will make her own judgments when she meets Mr. Jameson, Daniel said firmly, shooting his sister-in-law a quelling look. There's no need to frighten her with town talk. Margaret sniffed. Better frightened now than sorry later, I always say. She took a sip of her coffee, then looked surprised. This is good, she admitted reluctantly. You have a deft hand with coffee, Miss Ellison. Thank you, Clara said, grateful for the slight change in subject. My father taught me. He was particular about his morning brew. And what did your father do? Margaret asked, her tone suggesting she was cataloging Clara's social status. He was a professor of literature at Harvard, Clara replied, watching as Margaret's estimation of her visibly rose. My mother was a concert pianist before her marriage. Indeed. Margaret looked genuinely interested now. And they approved of this arrangement you've made? Clara shook her head. They passed away when I was 17. Influenza. Ah. For the first time, Margaret's stern expression softened with genuine sympathy. That must have been difficult. So young to be left alone in the world. It was, Clara acknowledged, but I was fortunate to have my education, and the Ladies' Academy was kind enough to offer me a position once I completed my own studies. Margaret nodded approvingly. Education is indeed a woman's best security in this uncertain world. She glanced at Sophie, who was quietly feeding scraps to the cat in the corner, pretending not to listen to the adult conversation. It's something I've tried to impress upon my niece, though she's more interested in her stories and daydreams than practical studies. Imagination has its place, Clara said gently. It's what drives us to create, to solve problems in new ways. Perhaps, Margaret conceded, though she didn't look convinced. She drained her coffee cup and stood. Well, I should be going. I have calls to make in town. She turned to Daniel. Will you be bringing Miss Ellison to the station this evening, or shall I send Patterson with his wagon? I'll take her, Daniel said quickly, but thank you for the offer. Margaret nodded, her sharp eyes missing nothing of the tension between them. Very well. Good day, Miss Ellison. I wish you luck with your adventure. After she left, a silence fell over the kitchen. Sophie was the first to break it, her voice small but determined. Is it true what Aunt Margaret said about Mr. Jameson being mean to his wives? Daniel sighed. Sophie, we don't know that for certain. People talk, especially in small towns. But what if it is true, the child persisted. What if he's mean to Miss Clara? Clara knelt to Sophie's level, touched by her concern. Your Aunt Margaret has given me something to think about, that's all. I'll be very careful when I meet Mr. Jameson, I promise. Or you could just stay here, Sophie said, the simple logic of a child cutting through all complications. Then you wouldn't have to worry about him at all. Clara exchanged a look with Daniel over Sophie's head. The child had, in her innocent way, laid bare the choice before her with startling clarity. Stay and embrace the unexpected connection she had found with this small family, this wild, beautiful land. Or go and honor the commitment she had made to a man she had never met, whose character was now cast in doubt. The afternoon stretched before them, each hour bringing Clara closer to the moment of decision. The train would come, delayed but inevitable, and she would have to choose. The planned path or the unexpected one, security or possibility, head or heart. And as she looked at Daniel and Sophie, their faces reflecting hope tempered with the fear of another loss, Clara Ellison realized that for the first time in her adult life, she truly had no idea what she was going to do. The hours after Margaret's departure stretched like taffy, tense, elongated, yet somehow sweet with possibility. Clara found herself wandering to the front porch, watching the western sky bloom with the intense colors of a New Mexico sunset. The mountains in the distance turned purple against the flaming horizon, their silhouettes stark and eternal. Daniel had retreated to the barn after their unexpected visitor left, busying himself with evening chores. Claire understood his need for space. They both had much to contemplate before tomorrow's decision. "Miss Clara?" Sophie's voice came softly from behind. "Would you like to see something special?" The child stood in the doorway, cradling something in her hands with the reverence usually reserved for holy objects. It was a small wooden boss, worn smooth at the edges from frequent handling, adorned with childish carvings of stars and flowers. "It's my treasure box," Sophie explained, settling beside Clara on the porch step. "Mama started it for me when I was little. Papa says everyone needs a place to keep their precious things." "It's beautiful," she said, gently touching the delicate, preserved petals. Sophie studied Clara's face intently. "You understand about remembering, don't you? Not everybody does. Aunt Margaret says we should put away Mama's things, that it's not healthy to dwell on what's gone. But Papa says remembering isn't the same as dwelling." "Your father is right," Clara said softly. "Remembering the people we've loved, keeping them in our hearts, that's how they stay with us, even when they're gone." Sophie nodded, satisfied with this confirmation of her father's wisdom. "That's why I keep my special box, so I won't forget important things." She hesitated, then carefully returned the pressed flower to its place in the book. "If you go away to Pine Ridge, will you remember us?" The question, asked with such straightforward simplicity, pierced Clara to the core. "Oh, Sophie," she said, gathering the child into her arms, "I could never forget you. Never." Sophie returned the embrace fiercely, her small arms strong around Clara's neck. "Then why do you have to go?" she whispered against Clara's shoulder. Clara had no answer that would satisfy either of them. The sound of a wagon approaching broke the moment. Sophie ran to the window, her expression brightening. "It's Mr. Patterson from town. Maybe he's brought the mail." Clara followed more slowly, grateful for the interruption. Through the window, she saw a slightly stooped man in his 60s climbing down from a wagon. Daniel emerged from the barn to greet him, and the two men conversed briefly before Daniel glanced toward the house, his expression troubled. A moment later, he came inside, a telegram in his hand. "Clara," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "This came for you. Patterson brought it from town." She took the yellow paper, puzzled. No one knew she was in Dust Creek. The only person who knew her intended destination was Harold Jameson. With a sense of foreboding, she unfolded the telegram and read, "Miss Ellison, stop regret to inform house fire destroyed ranch stop wedding must be postponed indefinitely. Stop, suggest you return to Boston. Stop, will write when able. Stop, Jameson." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she handed the paper to Daniel. "My plans, they're gone." He read it quickly, his brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, Clara. That's a hard blow." "Yes," she agreed, though strangely, what she felt most prominently wasn't disappointment or fear, but relief, a sensation so unexpected she hardly knew what to make of it. Later, as she explained the contents of the telegram to Sophie, Clara was surprised by how quickly she had accepted this abrupt change in her future. Perhaps some part of her had already begun to imagine a different path, here in Dust Creek. "What does it say, Papa?" Sophie asked, attempting to peer at the telegram. "Mr. Jameson's ranch had a fire," Daniel explained simply. "He won't be able to meet Miss Clara as planned." Sophie's eyes grew wide. "Does that mean she can stay with us?" "Sophie," Daniel admonished gently, "this is difficult news for Miss Clara. She needs time to think about what she wants to do." The child looked properly chastened, but couldn't quite hide the hope in her eyes as she looked at Clara. "I'm sorry about the fire, Miss Clara, but I'm not sorry if it means you might stay longer." "Sophie Marie," Daniel said more firmly this time, "why don't you go gather some eggs for supper? Give Miss Clara some peace." Once Sophie had reluctantly gone outside, Daniel turned to Clara, his expression concerned. "Are you all right?" Clara moved to the kitchen table and sat down, still clutching the telegram. "I hardly know," she admitted. "It seems unreal. Just yesterday, I was worrying about making the right impression, when I met Mr. Jameson, and now your plans have changed, Daniel finished for her. Life has a way of doing that to the best laid plans. Yes, Clara agreed, thinking of how her own life had veered from its expected course so many times. Her parents' deaths, Robert's betrayal, losing her position at the academy, and now this. The question is, what do I do now? Daniel sat across from her, his gray eyes steady. You have options, he said carefully. You could return to Boston, as Jameson suggests, or, Clara prompted, though she knew what he was going to say. Or you could stay, Daniel said simply. Here, with us. The words hung in the air between them, laden with possibility. Stay. Such a small word for such a momentous decision. Daniel, Clara began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. How could she explain the tumult of her feelings? The way her pragmatic nature warred with the unexpected yearning to belong to this place, to these people. You don't have to decide this minute, he assured her. The telegram changes things. You have time now. Time, that was true. With the Pine Ridge plan derailed, she was no longer bound by tomorrow's train schedule. She could take days, even weeks, to consider her next steps. Thank you, she said finally. I think I need some air to clear my head. Daniel nodded. Take all the time you need. Clara stepped outside, breathing in the clean, rain-washed air. The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed and bright, puddles reflecting the blue sky like scattered mirrors. She walked slowly toward the creek, drawn to the peaceful spot where Sophie had shown her the wild roses. The rushing water soothed her troubled thoughts, its constant movement a reminder that nothing in life remains static. She sat on the flat rock by the bank, watching the play of sunlight on the rippling surface. What did she truly want? Security had been her goal when she answered Harold Jameson's advertisement. A stable home, a respectable position as a rancher's wife, protection from the economic uncertainties that plagued a single woman with no family to support her. But now, faced with an unexpected alternative, Clara was forced to examine whether security alone was enough to build a life upon. In just 3 days, Daniel and Sophie Carter had awakened feelings in her that she had believed long dormant. Tenderness, belonging, even the first stirrings of love. Not the careful, measured affection she had hoped to develop with Harold Jameson over time, but something wilder, less predictable, frightening in its intensity. The babbling of the creek mingled with the distant call of meadowlarks as Clara considered her options. Her orderly mind tried to create lists of pros and cons, but her heart kept interrupting with certainties that defied logical analysis. A flash of movement caught her eye. Daniel silhouetted against the evening sky as he crossed between the barn and the chicken coop. Even at this distance, she recognized his purposeful stride, the set of his shoulders. 3 days, and already she knew him so well. A sound behind her made her turn. Sophie was approaching with exaggerated care, her small hands cupped before her as if carrying something infinitely precious. Miss Clara, she whispered, her voice hushed with wonder. The Araucana laid her first egg, and it's the color of the sky. The child knelt beside Clara and slowly, reverently opened her hands. Nestled in her palm was an egg unlike any Clara had ever seen, a soft, perfect blue, like a piece of summer sky fallen to earth. In all my life, Clara breathed, I've never seen anything so lovely. Papa says they're special, Sophie confided. When we got the hen last month, he said she'd bring something beautiful to the ranch, and now she has. She looked up at Clara, her eyes suddenly serious beyond her years. Just like you. Clara felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Miss Clara, Sophie said, her voice suddenly smaller. When I found this egg, I made a wish. Do you want to know what it was? If you want to tell me. I wished you wouldn't leave. The child's honesty was disarming. I know that sounds selfish when you have Mr. Jameson waiting and a whole life planned, but I can't help it. You feel like you're supposed to be here. Clara stared at the blue egg in Sophie's palm, this small miracle cradled in an even greater one, the miracle of this child's open heart. In that moment, her own heart made its decision, bypassing all her careful reasoning. Sophie, she said softly, do you know what I think? What? I think your wish might come true. The child's face brightened cautiously, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. You mean, Clara said, the certainty in her own voice surprising her, that I want to stay here in Dust Creek with you and your father. The child's face blazed with joy. She carefully set the blue egg in a nest of grass beside the rock, then threw her arms around Clara's neck. I knew it, she whispered fiercely. I knew God sent you to us. I knew it wasn't a mistake. Over Sophie's shoulder, Clara caught a movement at the edge of the trees. Daniel stood watching them, his expression unreadable from this distance. How long had he been there? Had he heard her decision? Sophie, she said gently, disentangling herself from the child's embrace. Why don't you take your special egg back to the house? Put it somewhere safe for tomorrow's breakfast. Are you coming? Sophie asked, retrieving her treasure. In a moment. I think your father wants to talk to me. Sophie looked toward the trees, spotting Daniel. A knowing smile spread across her face. I'll go very slowly, she promised in a stage whisper, so you can have plenty of time to talk. Clara watched amused as the child made a show of walking at an exaggeratedly slow pace back toward the house, turning occasionally to check that Clara and Daniel were indeed talking. Daniel approached as Sophie retreated, his steps measured, almost cautious. He sat beside Clara on the rock, leaving a respectful distance between them. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, he said. I came to tell you supper will be ready soon. How much did you hear? Clara asked. Enough, he admitted. Did you mean it? About staying? Clara looked at him directly, taking in the weathered face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. The kind gray eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the mouth that could curve into a smile that transformed his entire countenance. Yes, she said simply, if the offer still stands. Daniel released a breath as if he'd been holding it since her arrival. It stands, he assured her. It will always stand. He hesitated, then moved his hand to cover hers where it rested on the sun-warmed rock. Clara, I know this is sudden, that we've known each other only days, but I feel— I know, she interrupted softly. I feel it too. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the unspoken hanging between them, not awkward, but rich with possibility. The creek burbled beside them, and somewhere a meadowlark trilled its liquid song. In the distance, Sophie had finally reached the house, giving up her pretense of slowness for the last few yards and breaking into a run. She'll be telling the chickens you're staying, Daniel said with a quiet laugh. And the cat, and probably the new calf too. She's a remarkable child, Clara observed. So resilient, so open-hearted, despite everything she's been through. She gets that from her mother, Daniel said, a bittersweet smile touching his lips. Emma always saw the good in everything, even the hardest times. He turned to look at Clara directly. She would have liked you, you know, would have approved. The simple statement meant more to Clara than any passionate declaration could have. Thank you for telling me that. Daniel's hand tightened slightly on hers. I want to do this right, Clara. Not rush you, not pressure you. I know you came here looking for security, for stability. I can't promise we'll never have hard times. Any rancher who did would be a liar. But I can promise you won't face them alone. That's all anyone can ask for, Clara said softly. Not that life will be easy, but that we'll have someone to share it with, both the joys and the hardships. Daniel nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. There's something else I should tell you before you make your decision final. Clara tensed slightly, wondering what complications she had yet to learn about. Yes? I wrote to a mail-order bride service myself, he admitted. About 6 months ago. I never sent the letter, but I wrote it. Sat right here, in fact, trying to find words to describe what I was looking for. He gestured around them at the creek, the wild roses. Emma loved this spot. I felt closer to her here, like I could ask her permission in a way. What stopped you from sending it? Claire asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Fear, I suppose. Fear that whoever came wouldn't love Sophie the way she deserves. Fear that I'd be settling for convenience instead of what I had with Emma. Fear that I was too broken by grief to be a good husband to anyone. He looked down at their joined hands. And now here you are, as if you'd answered a letter I never sent. The simple wonder in his voice moved Clara deeply. Perhaps I did, she said softly, in a way that has nothing to do with post offices or telegraph wires. Daniel's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a cautious but growing hope. like a winter-dormant plant showing the first green shoots of spring. "Clara Ellison, Bob," he said, his voice low and earnest, "would you consider staying here, not just as our guest or as Sophie's teacher, but as—" A shout from the direction of the house interrupted him. They both turned to see Sophie running toward them, her face alight with excitement. "Papa! Miss Clara, come quick! Visitors!" Daniel stood, helping Clara to her feet. "Visitors? We rarely get visitors out here, especially not after a storm when the roads are bad." They hurried back to the house, where a smart buggy now stood in the yard. Beside it stood Margaret Thornton and a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 40s, dressed in the unmistakable garb of prosperity. A well-cut suit that, while not ostentatious, spoke of quality and taste. "Daniel," Margaret called as they approached, "this gentleman has come all the way from Pine Ridge looking for Miss Ellison." Clara felt her heart sink. Could it be Harold Jameson? Had the telegram been a mistake? The timing couldn't have been worse, just as she had decided to stay, just as Daniel had been about to formalize his offer. As they drew closer, the stranger stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Ellison, I'm Theodore Jameson, Harold's brother. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Clara said automatically, though relief washed through her at the realization that this was not her intended. "Please, come inside. You must be tired after your journey." Inside the house, Margaret took charge, preparing coffee while Daniel showed their guest to the most comfortable chair in the main room. Clara sat opposite him, aware of Sophie hovering nearby, her expression watchful and wary. "I must apologize for arriving unannounced," Theodore Jameson said, accepting the cup Margaret handed him. "When I learned you had missed your connection at Pine Ridge, I became concerned for your welfare. The station master mentioned you had disembarked at Dust Creek by mistake." "That's very kind of you," Clara said, wondering what had really prompted this visit. "I received your brother's telegram earlier today. I was sorry to hear about the fire." A shadow crossed Theodore's handsome face. "Yes, about that. I'm afraid there's been some confusion. There was no fire." Clara stared at him, uncomprehending. "But the telegram was not sent by my brother," Theodore said gravely. "I believe it was a deception, though I don't yet know by whom or for what purpose." Daniel leaned forward, his posture protective. "Are you saying someone deliberately misled Miss Ellison?" "I fear so," Theodore confirmed. "When Harold didn't meet you at the station as planned, he grew concerned. He sent me to retrace your journey to ensure your safety." He looked directly at Clara. "My brother is very much looking forward to meeting you, Miss Ellison. The house is prepared. The arrangements for the wedding are in place. He asked that I escort you to Pine Ridge as soon as you are ready to travel." The room fell silent. Clara felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. The telegram had been false. Her plans with Harold Jameson still stood. She was expected in Pine Ridge by a man who had gone to the trouble of sending his brother to find her when she didn't arrive as scheduled. "I see," she said finally, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "That's most considerate of Mr. Jameson." "My brother is a considerate man," Theodore said warmly. "He's built a beautiful home, Miss Ellison. One of the finest in the territory. You'll want for nothing as his wife." "How fortunate for Miss Ellison," Margaret remarked, her sharp eyes missing nothing of the tension in the room, "to be so sought after." Clara couldn't bring herself to look at Daniel or Sophie. Just moments ago, by the creek, she had made her decision, had chosen this small family and their modest ranch over the security she had originally sought. And now, learning that her original plan was still viable, she found herself torn again, not by the pull of luxury or ease, but by the sense of obligation, of keeping one's word. "When would Mr. Jameson expect me?" she asked, buying time to gather her thoughts. "I could take you back to Pine Ridge tomorrow," Theodore suggested. "My buggy is comfortable and the road should be passable by then. The worst of the mud will have dried." "Tomorrow," Clara repeated, the word falling like a stone. So soon. No time to adjust to this new reality, to the whiplash of changing circumstances. "Unless you need more time to prepare," Theodore added, mistaking her hesitation for practical concerns. Though Harold did mention that the Justice of the Peace is only available for the next few days before he travels to Santa Fe. "I see," Clara said again, feeling as if she were reading from a script. playing a part in a drama whose ending she could not predict. Sophie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "But Miss Clara can't go to Pine Ridge tomorrow," she declared. "She promised to have the blue egg for breakfast with us." Theodore looked bemused by this non sequitur. "I'm sure Miss Ellison can have eggs in Pine Ridge, little one." "Not a special blue egg that I found just for her," Sophie insisted, her lower lip beginning to tremble. "And not with us." "Sophie," Daniel said gently, "why don't you go check on that egg now? Make sure it's safe for tomorrow." The child looked like she might protest, but something in her father's expression made her nod and slip quietly from the room. Clara watched her go, heart aching at the slump of the small shoulders, the dragging steps so different from Sophie's usual boundless energy. "You must forgive my daughter," Daniel said to Theodore. "Miss Ellison has been very kind to her during her stay with us. Sophie will miss her." The simple dignity in his voice, the careful neutrality that betrayed nothing of his own feelings, made Clara want to weep. This good man was preparing to step aside, to let her go without protest if that was her choice. "Children form attachments quickly," Theodore observed, not unkindly. "I'm sure she'll adjust." "Yes," Margaret agreed, though her tone held an unexpected note of doubt. "Children are resilient." A strained silence fell over the room. Clara felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Everyone waiting for her to make a decision, to choose a path. "Mr. Jameson," she said finally, "would you mind terribly if I took some time to consider? It's been a rather overwhelming day, with the false telegram and now your arrival." "I see," Theodore said, his expression carefully controlled, though Clara could detect the disappointment beneath his polite veneer. "My brother will be disheartened. He's spent considerable time preparing for your arrival. A new wing added to the house, furnishings selected with care. He even acquired a pianoforte when he learned of your musical abilities." Clara felt a pang of guilt. "I never intended to cause Mr. Jameson any pain. Please convey my sincere apologies." "Miss Ellison," Theodore leaned forward, his voice earnest. "I understand the appeal of spontaneity, but I must ask you to consider the commitment you made to my brother. 3 days in a strange place can create impressions that may not withstand the test of time." "Mr. Jameson," Daniel began, but Theodore held up a hand. "With respect, Mr. Carter, I'm addressing Miss Ellison." Theodore turned back to Clara. "Would you at least consider meeting Harold before making your final decision? I could return tomorrow and we could reach Pine Ridge by nightfall. You could see the home that awaits you, meet the man who has been preparing for your arrival these past months." Clara's resolve wavered momentarily under the weight of obligation, but then she felt Daniel's steady presence beside her and knew her mind. "I'm truly sorry, but my decision is made. My place is here now." Theodore studied her for a long moment before sighing. "Very well, I can see your mind is set." He rose to leave, placing his hat carefully on his head. "Mrs. Thornton has kindly offered me lodging in town tonight." "You're welcome to stay here," Daniel offered, the perfect host despite the circumstances. "That's very generous, but I've imposed enough," Theodore declined. He paused at the door, his expression thoughtful. "That telegram still troubles me. It wasn't merely a mistake, it was deliberate deception." "Do you have any idea who might have sent it?" Clara asked. Theodore hesitated. "Yesterday in Pine Ridge, I spoke with the telegraph operator. He mentioned a woman had been asking unusual questions about my brother's correspondence with a Boston lady. A well-dressed woman," he said, wearing morning clothes despite the heat. Clara and Daniel exchanged startled glances. "Margaret," Daniel said, his voice incredulous. "Your sister-in-law?" Theodore asked, eyebrows raised. "Interesting, very interesting indeed." "I can't imagine why she would," Daniel began, then fell silent, his expression darkening. Theodore observed them carefully. "Well," he said finally, "it seems there's more happening here than meets the eye. I wish you both well, though I cannot pretend to understand this unusual arrangement." He nodded to Clara. "My brother is a good man, Miss Ellison. I hope your choice brings you no regrets." With that, he departed, leaving Clara and Daniel standing in troubled silence. Daniel moved to the window, watching Theodore's buggy disappear down the road, his posture rigid with tension. "Daniel," Clara began, not sure what she could possibly say to ease this moment. Do you think Margaret really sent that telegram? He asked quietly, still facing the window. Why would she do such a thing? I don't know, Clara admitted. Perhaps she thought that you'd give up and come back here? Daniel turned to face her, his expression troubled. That doesn't make sense. She's been determined to see you gone. Clara considered this, unless she wanted to delay me meeting Mr. Jameson, to give us more time together. Margaret? Daniel's disbelief was evident. The woman who's been telling Sophie for months that she needs a proper mother, not just a doting father. The woman who's been pushing for me to meet Mrs. Hargrove from Santa Fe? People aren't always what they seem, Clara said softly. Perhaps she saw something in me, in us, that she didn't expect. Daniel shook his head, bewildered. I don't know what to believe anymore. First that telegram, now this revelation about Margaret. He looked at Clara, vulnerability evident in his eyes. The only thing I'm certain of is how I feel about you. But Clara, I would understand if all this has made you reconsider. Theodore Jameson painted quite a picture of what awaits you in Pine Ridge. Daniel, please look at me, Clara pleaded, moving closer. Slowly he met her gaze. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed him, the pain there, the struggle to maintain his dignity while his hopes seemed to crumble, broke Clara's heart. What I said before Theodore arrived, she began. I meant it. I want to stay. A flicker of hope crossed his face, quickly suppressed. You don't have to say that out of kindness, Clara. I would never hold you to words spoken before you knew all the facts. It's not kindness, Clara insisted. It's truth, the truest thing I've ever said. Daniel took a step toward her, then stopped, as if afraid to hope too much. But Jameson, his brother, came all this way to find you. You have obligations. I have an agreement with a stranger, Clara corrected. A man I've exchanged a handful of letters with. A man who knows nothing of me beyond what can be conveyed in ink on paper. She moved closer until she was standing directly before him. Daniel, 3 days ago, I got off a train at the wrong station. I thought it was a mistake, a disruption to my carefully laid plans. But it wasn't a mistake at all. It was the first right thing that's happened to me in years. Clara, he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. I came west looking for security, she continued, for stability. But I found something better here, a place where I'm needed, not just useful. A child who's claimed me as her own, and a man, her voice caught, a man who sees me, really sees me, not just what I can propagate or represent. Daniel's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle as if she were made of the finest porcelain. Are you sure? I can't offer you what Jameson can. The ranch struggles some years. Sophie can be a handful. I'm not an educated man like your father was. Clara covered his hands with her own. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. This is where I belong. With you and Sophie, in this house that's become more home to me in 3 days than Boston was in years. The joy that transformed Daniel's face was like sunrise after the darkest night, illuminating every feature with a light that came from within. Clara Ellison, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I believe I've been waiting for you my whole life, even before I knew it. And then, with the simplicity that characterized everything about him, Daniel Carter kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful and questioning at first, then deepening as Clara responded, her arms sliding around his neck to draw him closer. In that moment, everything else fell away. The complications, the obligations, the practicalities. There was only this man, this place, this certainty that she had found, quite by accident, exactly where she was meant to be. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. What will you tell Jameson's brother if he returns? The same thing I told him today, Clara said simply, that I'm staying in Dust Creek, that I've found my home. A small sound from the doorway made them turn. Sophie stood watching them, her eyes wide, a cautious hope lighting her face. Are you really staying, Miss Clara? Forever? Clara opened her arms and Sophie flew into them, a whirlwind of joy and relief. Yes, sweetheart, Clara assured her, feeling Daniel's arm come around them both, completing the circle. I'm staying forever. Well, Daniel said after a moment, that went more smoothly than I expected. Yes, Clara agreed, a weight lifting from her shoulders. I thought there might be more resistance. He seems like a reasonable man, Daniel observed. I hope his brother is as understanding. I hope so too, Clara said, though in truth, Harold Jameson's feelings seemed distant and abstract now, like a story she had read long ago rather than a man she had nearly married. Sophie came bursting through the back door, her face expectant. Is he gone? Did you tell him you're staying with us forever? He's gone, Clara confirmed, smiling at the child's eagerness. And yes, I told him I'm staying right here with you and your father. Forever and ever, Sophie pressed, needing the reassurance. Forever and ever, Clara promised, opening her arms to receive Sophie's enthusiastic embrace. Over the child's head, she met Daniel's eyes, seeing in them the same certainty that filled her own heart. This was right. This was where she belonged. The wrong station had led her to exactly the right place. The next afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was in the kitchen, teaching Sophie how to make bread, their hands dusted with flour, when the sound of a wagon approaching drew their attention. It's Aunt Margaret, Sophie announced, peering through the window. And she looks different. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. Margaret was indeed approaching, but gone was her usual severe black dress. Instead, she wore a simple gray frock with a blue shawl, still modest but noticeably less somber. Her hair, while still pulled back, had been arranged more softly around her face. Good afternoon, Clara greeted her, uncertain what to expect after yesterday's revelations. Margaret nodded stiffly. Miss Ellison, I understand you've decided to stay in Dust Creek. I have, Clara confirmed. An awkward silence fell between them. Sophie had retreated to the kitchen table, watching the exchange with cautious interest. I brought these, Margaret said finally, retrieving a basket from her wagon. Cuttings from my rose bushes, the hardy variety that survived the winter. For your garden. Clara accepted the basket, surprised by the gesture. That's very kind of you. Not kindness, Margaret said quickly, her voice containing its usual crispness, though something softer lurked beneath. Practicality. If you're to make a home here, you'll need proper gardens. Clara studied the older woman's face, remembering Theodore's description of the woman at the telegraph office. Mrs. Thornton, she began carefully, may I ask you something rather direct? Margaret's posture stiffened, but she nodded once. Did you send that telegram? The one claiming Mr. Jameson's ranch had burned? The silence stretched between them, interrupted only by the distant call of a meadowlark. Margaret's eyes, usually sharp as flint, wavered. I did what was necessary, she said finally, her voice barely audible. For Daniel. For Sophie. But you hardly know me, Clara said, bewildered. You were suspicious of me from the start. Margaret looked away, her gaze falling on Sophie in the kitchen. I know enough. I've seen how that child smiles again. How Daniel stands straighter. She turned back to Clara, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and vulnerability. Emma was my only sister. When she died, something in Daniel died too, until you arrived. But the telegram, Clara pressed, still trying to understand, why interfere that way? Margaret's chin lifted. Because men are fools who can't see what's right in front of them. Daniel would have let you go out of some misguided sense of honor. And you, her gaze sharpened, you might have continued on your practical path without realizing what you were leaving behind. Clara was rendered speechless by the older woman's unexpected insight. I won't apologize, Margaret added stiffly, and I'd appreciate if you didn't mention this to Daniel. He wouldn't understand. Before Clara could respond, Daniel emerged from the barn, noticing Margaret's wagon. Margaret, he called, approaching, this is a surprise. Just bringing some rose cuttings, Margaret replied, her manner returning to its usual brisk efficiency. The Boston variety Miss Ellison is accustomed to wouldn't last a week in our soil. Daniel glanced between the two women, sensing the undercurrents. That's thoughtful of you. Yes, well, Margaret adjusted her shawl. Someone has to think practically around here. I should be going. Sunday dinner as usual? Of course, Daniel confirmed, still looking puzzled. Margaret nodded once to Clara. Miss Ellison. She hesitated, then added, I expect you'll want help with those wedding preparations. when the time comes. With that parting remark, she climbed back into her wagon and departed, leaving Clara with a basket of rose cuttings and a newfound understanding of the complicated woman who had, in her own unconventional way, helped guide Clara to her true home. "What was that about?" Daniel asked, joining Clara on the porch. Clara smiled, tucking away Margaret's confession as a private understanding between women. "I believe, in her own way, she's welcoming me to the family." The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, as if Clara had always been a part of this household, this land. She and Sophie planted an expanded garden, adding flowers among the vegetables, marigolds to deter pests, morning glories to climb the fence posts, zinnias for cutting and bringing inside. Daniel built shelves in the main room for Clara's books, the few she had brought with her and others ordered from the catalog, forming the nucleus of a family library. Margaret Thornton, surprisingly, became one of Clara's strongest allies in the community. After her initial suspicion, she had come to appreciate Clara's positive influence on Sophie and the obvious happiness she brought to Daniel. "You're good for them," Margaret admitted one afternoon as they worked together, canning peaches from the Thornton orchard. "Both of them. The house feels alive again when I visit." "Thank you for saying that," Clara replied, touched by the older woman's approval. "It means a great deal coming from you." Margaret's stern mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "I was wrong about you, Clara Ellison. I thought you were some city woman looking for an easy life in the territory. I see now you have more backbone than that." In late September, with autumn painting the cottonwoods along the creek in shades of gold, Daniel took Clara into town for dinner at the small hotel, their first official courting outing. They sat at a table by the window, somewhat self-conscious under the interested gazes of the townspeople, many of whom had heard the story of the teacher who got off at the wrong station and found her heart's home instead. "Everyone's staring," Clara whispered, smoothing her napkin over her lap. "Let them," Daniel replied, his gray eyes warm as they rested on her face. "They're just envious of my good fortune." After dinner, they walked through the quiet streets, arm in arm, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear desert sky. When they reached the small town square, Daniel guided her to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice serious. Clara's heart quickened. "Yes?" From his pocket, Daniel withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I know we agreed to take our time, to court properly," he began, "and I still want to do that. But I also want everyone to know that you've chosen me, that we've chosen each other." He opened the pouch and tipped its contents into his palm, a simple gold ring set with a single perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Not fancy, but—" "It's beautiful," Clara interrupted, transfixed by the luminous gem glowing softly in the starlight. "Clara Ellison," Daniel said, his voice steady though his hand trembled slightly. "Will you marry me? Not right away, whenever you're ready, but will you wear this ring as a promise that someday, when the time is right, you'll be my wife?" Clara's vision blurred with tears of happiness. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Daniel Carter, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, a kiss that sealed their promise under the watching stars, witnessed only by the rustling cottonwood leaves and the distant coyotes singing their age-old songs to the moon. In the weeks and months that followed their engagement, Clara found herself settling into the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease. The transition from Boston school teacher to frontier woman wasn't without challenges. Learning to cook on a temperamental wood stove, mastering the art of preserving vegetables for the winter, adapting to the isolation when storms made the roads impassable. "You're taking to it like you were born to it," Daniel remarked one evening in November as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "It helps to have good teachers," Clara replied, thinking of Margaret's patient instructions on canning peaches, of old Sam Winters stopping by with a brace of rabbits and staying to show her how to prepare them properly. Sam had become a regular visitor since the engagement announcement, the gruff old rancher revealing an unexpected tenderness towards Sophie and a wealth of practical knowledge he seemed eager to share with Clara. "That child needs mothering," he'd said plainly during one of his first visits. Good to see Carter finally found someone with sense enough to see what was right in front of her. As autumn deepened toward winter, Clara and Daniel agreed to wait until Christmas for their wedding. "I want to do this right," Daniel had said. "Give you time to be sure. Give Sophie time to adjust. Give the neighbors something to talk about besides that telegram business." The telegram business, as it had come to be known, remained something of a mystery. Margaret had neither confirmed nor denied her involvement, though her attitude toward Clara had undergone a remarkable transformation, from suspicious hostility to grudging respect, then finally to something approaching affection. She'd even begun bringing pattern books on her visits, sitting with Clara in the afternoons while Sophie was at her lessons, planning the wedding dress together. "Emma would have approved," Margaret had said one day, so suddenly that Clara had pricked her finger with the needle. "She always said Daniel would need someone strong but gentle, someone educated who could help with Sophie's schooling, but not too fine for ranch work." She'd looked up from her stitching, meeting Clara's startled gaze. "I didn't believe such a woman existed. Certainly not one who'd choose Dust Creek over Pine Ridge." It was as close to a confession as Margaret would ever come regarding the telegram, but it was enough for Clara. She understood now what Daniel had meant about his sister-in-law's fierce love for them, complicated though it might be by grief and pride. As the wedding date approached, Clara found herself not with the nervous anticipation she had expected, but with a deep, settled certainty. This was right. This land, this house, this family that had claimed her, this was where she belonged. They were married on Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside the small church in Dust Creek. Sophie served as flower girl, solemn in her responsibility, until the moment Clara appeared at the back of the church in a gown of ivory wool. Then the child's composure dissolved into a radiant smile that matched her father's as he watched his bride approach. The ceremony was simple but profound, their vows spoken with the quiet certainty of people who had found in each other not just love, but home. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Daniel kissed his bride, the small congregation erupted in cheers led by Sophie's exuberant voice. Later, at the reception in the community hall, as Daniel led her in their first dance as husband and wife, Clara reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. The loss of her parents, the betrayal by her first fiancé, the closing of the academy, all events that had seemed like disasters at the time, but had ultimately led her to board that train, to fall asleep at the crucial moment, to get off at the wrong station and find her heart's true home. "Happy?" Daniel murmured, his lips close to her ear as they moved to the music. "Perfectly," Clara replied, leaning into his strength, feeling the rightness of their partnership in every fiber of her being. Who would have thought a simple mistake could lead to such happiness? "Not a mistake," Daniel corrected gently. "A miracle. The best kind of miracle. The kind that looks ordinary until you recognize it for what it truly is." Across the room, Sophie was dancing with Sam Winters, the gruff old rancher who had taken a surprising shine to the child, letting her stand on his boots as he shuffled around the floor. The little girl caught Clara's eye and beamed, a smile of such pure joy that it brought tears to Clara's eyes. "She was right all along, wasn't she?" Clara said softly, "about God answering her prayers." "She was," Daniel agreed, "wiser than all of us, seeing the truth from the very beginning." As they danced beneath garlands of pine and red berries, snow continuing to fall softly outside, blanketing the world in pristine white, Clara Ellison Carter knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not in a grand ranch in Pine Ridge, not in a ladies' academy in Boston, but here in this small town with the unlikely name of Dust Creek, with a man who loved her with quiet strength and a child who had claimed her from the very first moment. The wrong station had led her home.